Welcome to EDU World Space.
We are given a function f, we're given its graph, and we're told that g is the function defined to be the integral from 0 to x of f of t dt. In part A, we're asked to evaluate g of 0 and g of 6. Well, by definition, g of 0 is the integral from 0 to 0 of f of t dt. Since the limits of the integral are the same, it follows that this is just 0. Likewise, g of 6, by definition, is the integral from 0 to 6 of f of t dt. However, notice that the graph of f has rotational symmetry about
Nobody's gonna believe you. Nobody's gonna believe this happened. You can fucking cry all you want. Nobody's gonna believe you. What's the show? Whose name is on the show? Hey, look.
the point 3, 0. So the part from x equals 0 to 3 is equal in area but opposite in sign to the part from x equals 3 to 6. And therefore, this is equal to g of 6 is in fact 0 as well. Then in part B, we're asked to estimate g of x for x from 1 to 5. So to do this, you want to count the squares between the graph of f and the x-axis. And so these are going to be pretty rough estimates. Therefore, the squares above the x-axis we count as positive, the squares below the x-axis we count as negative. And so, for example, you might calculate g of 1. Well, this is the area under f from 0 to 1, which is about 2.8. Likewise, counting squares again, g of 2 is approximately g of 1, which was 2.8, plus the area from x equals 1 to 2 under the graph of f, which is about 1.9. And so this is approximately 4.7. Likewise, g of 3 is approximately the area from x equals 0 to 2 under the curve 4.7, plus the area from x equals 2 to 3 under the curve, which is about 0.6. And so this is about 5.3. And we can do these same processes for g of 4 and g of 5. G of 4 is about 5.3, but now we subtract about 0.6, which is about 4.7. And likewise, g of 5 is about g of 4, which was 4.7 minus about 1.9, which is about 2.8. Then in part C, we're asked on what interval is the function g increasing. Well, from x equals 0 to 3, the area between the curve and the x-axis is all positive, and then negative afterwards. So, as x goes from 0 to 3, it follows that the cumulative area increases. On the other hand, past x equals 3, total cumulative area decreases.
Most of it was illegal. You know that farm he had a boy who had Down syndrome. And he fucked the corn can.
And therefore, it follows that the function g is increasing on the interval 0, 3.
We did that half those songs. Happy birthday, what? No. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. And what? Happy birthday to you. No. Yeah, nice try.
Then in part D, we're asked where the function g has a maximum value. Well, as we pointed out in part C, g is increasing on the interval 0 to 3 and is then decreasing on the interval 3, 6. Therefore, it follows that g has a maximum value at x equals 3. Then in part E, we're asked to sketch a rough graph of g.
I would be upset if we didn't instead. Yeah, me too. I don't want only because I like to think of myself as cooler than same school. Not because I'd actually be set.
Well, we have our table of values essentially from parts A and B,
Yes, he was.
and so we can simply plot these points along a smooth curve.
But that was from her Instagram. That's so weird. Yeah, I guess I would be happy. I don't support that. You say you would be happy. I guess I'd be happy. I don't know what I'd do. If I had the ability to stop, it's okay. It's okay to take pleasure in the death of people that you consider to be slight enemies or inconveniences. Look, dude, we're powerful men. You need to start living, man. You gotta wax some of our enemies. I would be lying if I said that I've never paid to have someone killed. That would be an untrue statement.
So, for example, we have a point at 0, 0, a point at about 1, 2.8,
The only reason I'm obsessed with all these private island psychopaths
at about 2, 4.7, 3, 5.3,
chicken soup. He was just trying to fuck kids.
and it's symmetrical about the line x equals 3.
Let's get dinner and then go.
And so the graph looks something like this.
Yeah, but I feel like we got some energy. Now that I'm like, I'll do it for the live show. I've been getting hungry for like 15 minutes. But let's keep going. You want to go? No.
Then in part F, we're asked to use the graph in part E to sketch the graph of the derivative g prime of x, and then to compare this graph with the graph of f.
All right, listen, I'm going to plug my dates. And then I'm going to start cooking. Oh, yeah. For this average, August 12th, auto bar. Yes. What is the Boston date? September?
Well, from part D, we have the graph of g. We already saw that g has a maximum at x equals 3, and the slope of the tangent line at x equals 3 is 0. So in other words, g prime of 3 equals 0. Now on the left-hand side of x equals 3, g is increasing, and therefore g prime is going to be positive on the interval 0, 3. And it's decreasing to the right of x equals 3, so that g prime is negative on 3 to 6. Notice also that the rate at which g is increasing gets smaller and smaller as x moves from 0 to 3. So it follows that g prime of 0 is a maximum
He's been doing it as like he thinks it's fun, like funny thing to say.
I was crying because just a suggestion of something so racist.
and G prime is decreasing
And it's weird because you really dislike
on the interval 0, 3.
so it's like strange.
Also,
You like the yellow.
likewise,
Yeah.
on the right-hand side, the rate at which G is decreasing gets larger and larger, at least in absolute value, as x moves from 3 to 6. So it follows that G prime of 6 is a minimum of G, and that G prime is increasing.
Tuesday nights will be my big gaming session, and I think I'll do Monday meal prep. Just fucking Monday.
I'm sorry, not increasing, but still decreasing
Once I have that couch stopped,
Yeah, we're gonna game like
switch
Wicked
stream
Warriors.
from my place.
on the interval 3 to 6.
So that's it. Those are my plugs.
Also, I'm on You Know What, dude.
I am too.
With all this information,
So check us out yesterday.
we can sketch a graph of G prime,
No, I think they pre-record those, so it might be.
Oh, all right. Well then, something else.
Yeah. Either we already
and so
recorded or we're coming up soon.
Yeah. You know what? I will do that secret show. And
here is a graph of G prime. We start out with our maximum at x equals 0,
But yeah, some small, do like 100.
and then we decrease until we reach G prime of 3, which is 0, and then we have a minimum which is symmetrical below the x-axis,
Adam's in a commercial. Please don't ruin it
and
the way he ruined my commercial.
I didn't ruin your commercial. You kind of did post about it for me.
Yeah.
To be fair. No, you posted.
You posted
texted
about it,
everyone
and then you
so if we draw a smooth curve
opened the floodgates.
between these points, it looks something like this.
It's fine. You just didn't think, Also, but I should address, because in reading the subreddit, I see that people were claiming that I was bitching about something that was my own fault. I tried to manage exposure.
We're asked to compare this with the graph of f.
But,
Well,
whatever. Things happen. I would rather have of the show.
we see that at the very least,
So it's like, I'm not even.
the graph of G prime
Things happen. But, just point of fucking argument, they specifically mentioned
resembles
the subreddit and asked me to
the graph of
So
f.
it is absolutely your fault. The subreddit was 100% the problem.